Japan, a nation rich in warriors, emperors, and revolutionaries. From the emergence of the Yamato dynasty to the vibrant neon-soaked avenues of Tokyo, this country has experienced profound changes, cultural, political, and military, that have influenced not only its own fate, but also the trajectory of global history. This narrates the saga of Japan, a narrative that encompasses millennia of tradition, turmoil, and progress. Before the rise of the samurai and emperors, and long before Tokyo became a bustling metropolis, there existed a Japan that was strikingly different from the modern landscape we recognize today. Envision a time when Japan's islands were populated by small nomadic tribes, hunter-gatherers who thrived in the forests and along the shorelines, with a profound connection to the environment surrounding them. This marked the era of the Jomon period, when pottery represented the pinnacle of technology and rice cultivation had yet to be discovered. The tale of Japan's beginnings unfolds here, in a time of simplicity that set the stage for one of the world's most intricate and advanced cultures. The term Jomon, which translates to cord-marked, is derived from the unique pottery left behind by these early inhabitants, characterized by patterns made by pressing cords into wet clay. This pottery is not only among the oldest known globally, but also serves as a testament to the cultural creativity of these ancient peoples. It is thought that the Jomon peoples migrated to Japan during the last ice age, a period when lower sea levels allowed land bridges to connect the islands to the Asian mainland. They lived as hunter-gatherers for thousands of years, depending on the bountiful natural environment to meet their needs. The woodlands provided animals such as deer and boars, while the rivers and oceans were rich in fish and shellfish. Archaeological discoveries indicate they even hunted marine mammals, like dolphins and whales, which served as vital sources of food and materials. However, despite what modern perspectives may classify as a primitive way of living, the Jomon people demonstrated considerable sophistication. Their pottery was not just practical, but often highly artistic as well. The Jomon were among the earliest humans globally to create pottery, and their designs grew increasingly intricate over time, reflecting a profound appreciation for beauty. Many of their vessels are adorned with complex patterns that likely held spiritual or symbolic significance. This implies that the Jomon had a rich spiritual life, possibly venerating natural forces or their ancestors. The Jomon lived in small groups dispersed throughout Japan's islands, while many led a nomadic lifestyle, migrating with the seasons to pursue game or discover new fishing areas. Some established semi-permanent settlements. Archaeologists have found remnants of pit houses, dwellings dug into the ground, topped with thatched roofs, which were probably occupied for several years before being abandoned or reconstructed. One of the most captivating features of Jomon society is its seemingly minimal social hierarchy. Unlike later eras in Japanese history, which saw the establishment of strict class systems, the Jomon appear to have lived in relatively egalitarian groups. There is scant evidence of organized warfare or the hierarchical structures that would come to characterize Japanese society later on. Instead, the Jomon seemed more focused on survival, spirituality, and creative expression. Nevertheless, this does not imply that the Jomon were entirely insular or stagnant. Archaeological evidence suggests that they participated in trade with other groups, both within Japan and potentially with the Asian mainland. Artifacts such as jade, obsidian, and shells found at Jomon sites point to the exchange of goods over considerable distances. This trading network likely facilitated the dissemination of new ideas and technologies, aiding the gradual emergence of more complex societies. The spiritual beliefs of the Jomon people represent another fascinating element of their culture. Although no written documents survive from this period, the artifacts they produce provide intriguing insights into their beliefs. Among the most notable of these are the dog, small humanoid figurines discovered at numerous Jomon sites. These figurines, often characterized by amplified features such as large eyes or prominent bellies, may have been utilized in fertility ceremonies or various religious practices. Some researchers propose that they symbolize deities or spiritual entities, possibly ancestors who were honored by the community. Burial customs also indicate a belief in an afterlife, or the significance of commemorating the deceased. Certain Jomon graves include grave goods, pottery tools, and even food offerings, implying that it was thought these items were necessary for the deceased in the next realm. Additionally, there are indications that the Jomon may have engaged in some type of ancestor veneration, a custom that would persist in later Japanese traditions. By the conclusion of the Jomon period, life in Japan began to undergo significant changes. Around 300 BCE, Newcomers arrived on the islands from the Korean peninsula, introducing transformative technologies, most notably rice cultivation. This heralded the onset of the Yayoi period, an era marked by considerable social, cultural, and technological evolution. The advent of rice farming significantly transformed Japanese society. Unlike the Jomon, who lived as hunter-gatherers for thousands of years, the Yayoi population engaged in agriculture. Rice fields proliferated across the landscape, altering both the environment and the lifestyle of the people. Farming necessitated the formation of permanent settlements, leading to the growth of larger and more sophisticated villages compared to the small Jomon communities. The Yayoi also introduced advanced metalworking techniques, bringing bronze and iron tools and weapons into use. These new technologies enhanced farming and hunting efficiency, but they also introduced a more concerning aspect. The emergence of bronze and iron weaponry indicates that conflicts likely became more frequent during this time, as various groups vied for land and resources. This marked the early stages of a more stratified society, where wealth and authority became concentrated in a select few. By the 3rd century CE, the Yayoi civilization transitioned to the Kofun period, named for the enormous burial mounds, or kofun, that began to appear throughout the landscape. Some of these mounds were comparable in size to football fields and served as tombs for influential leaders who commanded large forces and ruled extensive territories. The most dominant of these leaders were part of the Yamato clan, which would ultimately lay the groundwork for Japan's first centralized state. Emerging in the 4th and 5th centuries CE, the Yamato state drew considerable influence from Korean and Chinese cultures. The rulers of Yamato adopted elements such as Chinese writing, administrative structures, and religious practices, including Buddhism, which arrived in Japan during the 6th century. These cultural adoptions helped solidify the Yamato's power and unify much of Japan under their governance. Additionally, the Yamato clan asserted divine lineage from the sun goddess Amaterasu, a claim that would subsequently provide legitimacy to the Japanese imperial family's authority. This divine association bestowed an aura of sanctity and power upon the Yamato rulers, establishing the foundations for a centralized, hierarchical society. By the conclusion of the Yamato period in 710 CE, Japan had evolved from a collection of dispersed hunter-gatherer tribes into a cohesive state with an organized government, a detailed social structure, and a rich cultural legacy. Even though the Jomon and Yayoi eras may appear remote and primitive in comparison to the later ages of samurai and shoguns, they established essential building blocks for Japan's future. The drive for innovation, the profound connection to nature, and the respect for ancestors that define the Jomon and Yayoi populations would continue to influence Japanese culture for centuries. In the following chapter, we will explore how these early influences were passed down into the era of emperors, court intrigue, and the rise of the samurai. The saga of the samurai originates in the Heian period, which is named after the imperial capital, Heian-kyo, present-day Kyoto. In 794, the Japanese imperial court relocated its capital from Nara to Heian-kyo, marking the onset of a new era of prosperity. The Heian period is often celebrated for its cultural brilliance, a time when art, literature, and poetry thrived under the support of the imperial court. However, beneath this sophisticated exterior, the nation was on the brink of collapse. Central to the Heian court was the emperor, but in reality, true authority frequently rested in the hands of noble families, particularly the influential Fujiwara clan. The Fujiwara maintained their dominance at court by marrying their daughters into the imperial lineage, thus securing their roles as regents and advisors to the emperor. This system of political maneuvering ensured the Fujiwara's supremacy for many centuries. During this era, Japan began to cultivate a unique culture, distinctly separate from the strong influences of China. Life at the Heian court was highly structured, with aristocrats spending their time composing poetry, corresponding through letters, and partaking in elaborate tea ceremonies. This elegant lifestyle is captured in works like The Tale of Genji, authored by the court lady Murasaki Shikibu. Often regarded as the first novel in the world, the tale of Genji provides insight into the lives of the Heian elite, where aesthetics, love, and the quest for beauty held utmost importance. Nevertheless, while the aristocracy reveled in luxury, the rural areas were increasingly overlooked. The central government's grip on the countryside weakened, allowing local warlords, known as daimyo, to gain power. These daimyo depended on warrior clans to uphold their authority, marking the emergence of the samurai, the legendary warrior class of Japan, as a formidable force. Although the Heian aristocrats were more focused on courtly intrigues than conflict, the samurai were consolidating their power in the provinces. At first, the samurai served merely as armed retainers for the nobility, tasked with guarding estates and resolving disputes among rival landowners. However, as the strength of the central government diminished, the samurai assumed more significant roles, ultimately becoming the effective rulers of various regions. The samurai adhered to a code of honor that would later be identified as Bushido, the way of the warrior. Although Bushido, as a formal ideology, would not be completely established until the later Edo period, many of its foundational tenets, such as loyalty, bravery, and honor, were already deeply embedded in samurai culture during the Heian period. A samurai's main obligation was to serve his lord, or daimyo, unreservedly, and this loyalty was frequently tested in violent conflicts. The transition of power from the aristocrats to the warrior class was gradual yet unstoppable. By the late 12th century, the samurai had amassed enough strength to confront the imperial court directly, paving the way for one of the pivotal confrontations in Japanese history, the Genpei War. The Genpei War was a 5-year struggle between two powerful samurai clans, the Taira and the Minamoto, fighting for supremacy in Japan. The origins of the conflict can be traced back to years of political intrigue at the Heian court. By the end of the 12th century, Taira clan, led by Taira no Kiyomori, had come to dominate the court, similar to the earlier influence of the Fujiwara clan. However, this dominance was resented by competing samurai factions, particularly the Minamoto. In 1180, Minamoto no Yoritomo, a young and ambitious leader of the Minamoto clan, instigated a rebellion against the Taira. The situation rapidly devolved into a full-blown civil war, with both factions assembling samurai warriors to support their causes. The conflict was fierce and featured many tactics that would characterize samurai combat for centuries: light cavalry, mounted archery, and close-range swordplay. The pivotal moment in the war occurred in 1184 at the Battle of Ichi-no-Tani, where the Minamoto achieved a decisive victory against the Taira. 2 years later, the final defeat was dealt at the Battle of Dan-no-Ura, a significant naval confrontation in which the Taira were thoroughly vanquished. Taira no Kiyomori's infant grandson, Emperor Antoku, perished in the battle, and the Minamoto emerged as the unrivaled rulers of Japan. With this victory, Minamoto no Yoritomo became Japan's first shogun, a military leader who possessed greater authority than the emperor. Yoritomo founded the Kamakura Shogunate, a new government based in Kamakura, distant from the imperial court in Kyoto. Although the emperor continued to serve as a symbolic figurehead, real power was now concentrated in the hands of the shogun and the samurai class. The Kamakura Shogunate initiated nearly 700 years of samurai governance in Japan. Under this regime, the samurai class rose to prominence in Japanese society, and the code of Bushido gained increased importance as the ethical framework for samurai conduct. The Kamakura period also saw the establishment of feudalism in Japan, as daimyo governed large territories and pledged allegiance to the shogun in return for military support and protection. Despite bringing a certain degree of stability to Japan, the Kamakura Shogunate faced numerous challenges. The most significant danger was the Mongol Empire, located across the sea. In the late 13th century, the Mongols, led by Kublai Khan, attempted to invade Japan on 2 occasions, in 1274 and 1281. The first invasion was a smaller-scale attack that involved Mongol forces landing on Kyushu. However, the Mongols struggled with Japan's terrain and military tactics, encountering fierce opposition from the samurai. After only a few days of conflict, a sudden storm, considered by the Japanese to be a divine wind or kamikaze, destroyed a substantial portion of the Mongol fleet, forcing their retreat. Undaunted, Kublai Khan initiated a second, larger invasion in 1281. This time, the Mongol contingent numbered over 140,000, marking it as one of the largest seaborne invasions in history. Nevertheless, the Japanese once again benefited from weather conditions. After months of intense battle, another typhoon struck, devastating the Mongol fleet and effectively concluding their campaign to conquer Japan. The kamikaze storms became legendary, leading the Japanese to believe that divine intervention had safeguarded their homeland. While the Kamakura Shogunate withstood the Mongol invasions, the expense of defending Japan weakened the government. The strain on the shogunate's resources, combined with internal political strife, ultimately resulted in its downfall in 1333, when the Ashikaga clan took control and established the Ashikaga Shogunate. The Ashikaga Shogunate, commonly referred to as the Muromachi Shogunate, governed Japan from 1336 to 1573. Although the Ashikaga clan retained power for several centuries, their governance was much less stable compared to that of the Kamakura Shogunate. The initial years of the Ashikaga Shogunate were characterized by a power struggle between the shogun and the emperor, resulting in the Nanbokucho period, during which rival imperial courts operated in the northern and southern parts of Japan. Ultimately, the Ashikaga Shogunate managed to re-establish some level of order, and the 15th century witnessed a cultural revival in Japan. This time is often known as the Muromachi period, named after the district in Kyoto where the Ashikaga established their headquarters. It was a period of significant artistic achievement, marked by the emergence of no theater, tea ceremonies, and ink painting. However, beneath the surface of this cultural prosperity lay a nation once again teetering on the edge of disorder. The onset of the Onin War in 1467 threw Japan into the Sengoku period, or Warring States period. For more than a century, civil war consumed Japan as daimyo across the nation fought for dominance. Samurai troops traversed the land, destroying villages, besieging fortifications, and annihilating their foes in a seemingly unending cycle of conflict. Nevertheless, even amid this warfare, individuals emerged who aimed to restore order to the turmoil. Three prominent warlords, Oda Nobunaga, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, and Tokugawa Ieyasu, would rise as the forces that unified Japan, each playing a vital part in the eventual conclusion of the Sengoku period. From the refined sophistication of the Heian court to the savage battlegrounds of the Sengoku period, the age of the samurai represented a time of significant transformation in Japan. The samurai, once mere retainers to the noble class, ascended to become the ruling elite, influencing the political, social, and cultural framework of Japan for generations. The principles of Bushido, emphasizing loyalty and honor, along with the warrior spirit that characterized the samurai, would continue to shape Japan long after the Sengoku period concluded. The violent turmoil of the Sengoku period ultimately came to a close. Japan, battered by more than 100 years of internal conflict, was on the verge of entering an era of relative tranquility and stability under the Tokugawa Shogunate. However, this peace was not without its costs. The previously thriving international connections Japan maintained were severed, its ports shuttered, and its culture became stagnant. For over 2 centuries, Japan would exist in isolation from the broader world, with its samurai standing watch, but now in a peacetime setting. While the rest of the world advanced through the age of exploration, industrial revolutions, and the formation of modern states, Japan remained confined within a feudal system until the unavoidable arrival from the West. The unification of Japan commenced with Oda Nobunaga, who initiated a savage campaign during the late 16th century to bring the warring daimyo under his leadership. Following his assassination, his devoted general Toyotomi Hideyoshi pursued the agenda, consolidating much of the nation under a single rule. The final unification of power occurred after the Battle of Sekigahara in 1600, where the third figure, Tokugawa Ieyasu, decisively vanquished his rivals and ushered in a new chapter in Japanese history. the process of unifying Japan. In 1603, Ieyasu was formally designated as shogun, the highest military leader of Japan. This signified the onset of the Tokugawa shogunate, which would oversee Japan for over 250 years. Unlike earlier shogunates, the Tokugawa regime was significantly more centralized and stable. It established a rigid class hierarchy, closely monitored the daimyo, and ensured that no individual warlord could once again undermine its power. Tokugawa Ieyasu's brilliance lay in his capability to form a governance model that guaranteed peace without the need for ongoing military campaigns. His administration set the capital in Edo, present-day Tokyo, distanced from the imperial court in Kyoto, enabling the shogun to govern without disruption from the emperor or other noble factions. The Tokugawa family employed strategies to preserve a careful equilibrium of power among the samurai, daimyo, and the common populace, averting uprisings while also maintaining the strict social order. A major innovation of the Tokugawa shogunate was the establishment of the Bakuhan system, a type of centralized feudalism that effectively restrained the daimyo's power. Under this framework, the shogun directly managed approximately a quarter of Japan's territory, including the most fertile agricultural lands, while the remainder was allocated among the daimyo. Nevertheless, the daimyo were mandated to pledge loyalty to the shogun and adhere to strict regulations that curtailed their independence. One of the most effective control mechanisms was the policy of sankin kotai, or alternate attendance. This requirement necessitated that the daimyo spend every other year in Edo, where their families remained as de facto hostages to ensure their obedience. Additionally, the daimyo were compelled to maintain extravagant residences in Edo, which imposed a significant financial burden on them. Consequently, a large portion of the daimyo's resources was invested in sustaining appearances in the capital rather than forming armies to contest the shogun. This structure resulted in a highly stratified society where transitioning between social classes was nearly unfeasible. At the top were the samurai, who functioned as administrators and military leaders. Beneath them were the peasants, who constituted the bulk of the population and were tasked with agriculture and tax obligations. Artisans and merchants ranked even lower, though the latter gradually accumulated substantial wealth during this period. A defining characteristic of the Tokugawa era was the Sakoku policy, or closed country. In 1639, the shogunate enacted a series of decrees that effectively isolated Japan from the outside world. All foreign trade, except for limited interactions with the Dutch and Chinese, was prohibited. Christian missionaries, who had been active in Japan during the 16th century, were expelled, and Japanese citizens were barred from leaving the country, with severe penalties including death for non-compliance. The motivations for this significant decision were both practical considerations and ideological beliefs. The Tokugawa regime was apprehensive that foreign influences, particularly Christianity, might disrupt their carefully established social order. The influx of European missionaries, particularly from Portugal and Spain, resulted in the swift spread of Christianity in certain regions of Japan. This posed a threat to the traditional Shinto and Buddhist religious frameworks that supported the legitimacy of the shogunate's authority. The Shimabara Rebellion in 1637, a major uprising led mainly by Christian peasants in southwestern Japan, validated these concerns. Although the rebellion was harshly quelled, it convinced the Tokugawa government that foreign influence had to be curbed at all costs. By closing the country, the shogunate aimed to safeguard Japan's political stability and protect its cultural traditions from external influences. However, the policy of Sakoku was not complete isolation. The shogunate allowed limited trade with China and Korea, and the Dutch were permitted to trade at a single outpost on the small artificial island of Dejima in Nagasaki Bay. The Dutch, unlike other Europeans, complied with Japan's stringent regulations, including a prohibition on Christian missionary activities. Through these controlled interactions, Japan continued to receive information about the outside world, albeit in a carefully regulated manner. While Japan remained largely isolated from the rest of the world, life during the Edo period was characterized by a sense of order and continuity. The Tokugawa shogunate prioritized stability, which meant that radical changes were discouraged, reflected in the rigid class system that dictated Japanese society. At the pinnacle of this hierarchy were the samurai, who transitioned from warriors to bureaucrats and officials. With Japan not engaged in significant warfare, many samurai found themselves without a defined role. Rather than fighting in battles, they took on governmental duties, managing tax collection, administering justice, and ensuring public order. However, the peaceful environment also led many samurai to struggle with maintaining their traditional way of life. With limited opportunities for combat, some samurai fell into poverty, while others became ronin, masterless samurai wandering the nation in search of job opportunities. Below the samurai were the peasants, who constituted around 80% of Japan's populace. They were responsible for cultivating rice, the cornerstone of the economy, and were heavily burdened with taxes imposed by the government. Despite their low social standing, peasants were deemed vital to the nation's welfare, and strict laws were established to bind them to the land. Movement between the social classes was forbidden, and peasants were restricted from engaging in any pursuits beyond farming. Below the peasants were the artisans, responsible for creating items like clothing, pottery, and tools. Although artisans were held in high regard for their skills, they were still viewed as having a lower status than peasants, since they did not grow food. At the lowest level of the social hierarchy were the merchants. Even though their social rank was low, merchants accumulated significant wealth as the Edo period's economy transitioned from farming to trade. This created a contradiction where the richest individuals in society often held the least social standing. Despite its seclusion, or perhaps as a result of it, Japan experienced a cultural revival throughout the Edo period. The era's relative peace and stability fostered a vibrant art scene, and the policies of the Shogunate supported the emergence of a distinct Japanese culture. That's it for now. Stay tuned for the part 2.